I'm Josh Klein.
And I'm Elise Hugh.
We host a podcast from Accenture called Built for Change.
Every part of every business is being reinvented right now. That means companies are facing brand new pressures to use fast evolving technologies and address shifting consumer expectations.
But with big changes come even bigger opportunities. We've talked with leaders from every corner of the business world to learn how they're harnessing change to totally reinvent their companies.
And how you can do it too.
Subscribe to Built for Change now so you don't miss an episode.
I'm Ken Harbaugh, host of Warriors in Their Own Words. If you love listening to this show as much as I love hosting it, I think you'll really like the Medal of Honor podcast, produced in partnership with the Medal of Honor Museum. Each episode talks about a genuine American hero and the actions that led to their receiving our nation's highest award for valor. They're just a few minutes each, so if you're looking for a show to fill time between these Warriors episodes, I think you'll love the Medal of Honor podcast. Search for the Medal of Honor podcast wherever you get your shows. Thanks. I'm Ken Harbaugh, host of Warriors in Their Own Words. In partnership with the Honor Project, we've brought this podcast back at a time when our nation needs these stories more than ever. Warriors in Their Own Words is our attempt to present an unvarnished, unsanitized truth of what we have asked of those who defend this nation. Thank you for listening, and by doing so, honoring those who have served. Today, we'll hear from Shipfitter Third Class James Wire. In this first part of his interview, Wire describes the chaos of serving on the USS Tennessee during the attack on Pearl Harbor and the Battle of Tarawa.
My name is James Wire. It's spelled James, then initial R, and Wire. I was on the USS Tennessee at Pearl Harbor on December the 7th, 1941. The number of the ship is BB-43. I woke up at 6 o'clock in the morning, and that was reveille. I ate breakfast about 7:15. About 7:50 or thereabouts, I went up to the top side, put on whites, working whites, went up top side, and just as I got up to the top of the hatch, about 7:55, a plane flew over, only about 50 feet high. It was below the bridge. Just went over our bow. I looked up, and it had red meatballs on the wings, so I knew that it wasn't ours. My general feeling was to dive for cover, because I realized that it was war. There weren't our planes. Usually, the planes had stars on them. That was our planes, and they landed at Ford Island, right next to us. We were tied up at Ford Island. They landed there all the time, and sometimes they would come by and they'd drop a 5-pound bag of flour on the ship to simulate an attack. And some of the fellows that were on deck, there was about over 100 men up there. But then the plane started strafing the wooden decks, and the little splinters started walking right across the deck, and they was trying to shoot all the men in white. Of course, they was easy to see by the pilots, and they came over so low that you could see the grin on the pilot's face. And of course, we didn't have a gun. We were unarmed. We were not expecting a war. And about that time, they sounded general quarters. And I heard a explosion on the ship next to us, which was the USS West Virginia. And it was a torpedo had blown up. And they sounded general quarters. I went immediately to my battle station, which was on the third deck aft by turret 3. I arrived at my battle station within a couple of minutes from the time I saw the plane, and everything was locked up. The chief shipfitter in charge asked me to go to the shipfitter shop. He left the keys in the desk. So I ran up there, got the keys, got back to my battle station, and the first bomb landed on the turret 2. Shrapnel went right through the shipfitter shop, hit that desk, and tore a hole in the deck right where in front of the desk where I'd been. And then a couple of minutes later, another heavy explosion, a bomb, 1,900-pound bomb, hit turret 3, about 35 feet from where I was. And you could hear the metal against metal, and of course the bomb disintegrated. It didn't burn because there was powder all around the turret, and it went right through a 4-inch top of the turret, the armor. So it killed 5 men and wounded about 32 others when it hit. About that time, a little bit later, the Arizona blew up right behind us, about 75 feet behind our stern. It blew up and it lifted my ship about 4 feet out of the water. Everybody that was standing up in the repair locker, there was about 8 of us there, we found ourselves sitting on the steel deck. All at once, our legs were knocked out from under us, and we knew something big had happened. And we had a fire in the storeroom down below, and I put on a breathing apparatus, went down and put that fire out. It was a small fire. And the smoke was pretty thick by that time. And our ship was on fire and burning. The Arizona blew flaming oil all over our wooden deck, all of the canvas cover that was on top of there. And it set us on fire. And right after that, they asked me to come up and man the hoses. I was a shipfitter third class, and my duties were firefighting and damage control. So I went aft and manned a 2.5-inch hose with another fellow. And we kept the fire away from our ship as best we could because it's burning fiercely on the water. The oil, I guess, from the Arizona was burning very rapidly, and it burnt the paint off of our ship and set us on fire. I manned the hose until I got relieved. I think it was about an hour. And by 10 o'clock, we had the fire out on our ship, and we were picking up swimmers from the Arizona that were in the water. Some of them had their hair burned off. And that was about the list of my days. We fought fire on the West Virginia next to us and put out the flames on their deck. And then we manned the hose for about a couple of hours after that to keep the burning oil away from us. They had motor wheel boats pulling the men out of the water, and we pulled a couple of men up on deck that had been swimming in the burning oil, and we took the hose and brushed the fire away from them. And as they came up, we had a long boat hook, and we pulled a couple up on deck. And we saved practically all the people that were on deck aft of the turret 2 of Arizona were saved. It was about 75 feet to the beach, and some of them just dived over in the water and swam to the beach. When I was manning the hoses, we pulled a couple of men out of the water, and all their hair was gone and burned off because they'd come up for air, and the oil was burning, so it just singed their hair right off. And I met a friend of mine was on the Arizona, and he was on deck, and he got off, and his hair was burned off, and it never grew back. So I saw him later at another station. I looked, and I saw the Arizona, and it broke the back of the Arizona and sank the ship behind us. And the West Virginia was tied up with us, and it sank down to the bottom. And up on the bow, I looked, and I saw the Oklahoma was turned upside down. So it was looked real bad, and it smelled real bad. The burning flesh was all around. It was one of the worst days of my life. And I knew that we had to fight. And I thank God that I came through alive. I knew we had to fight or die trying to fight this war and come back from the damage that we had been done to us. The thing of it is, your adrenaline kicks in, and you can lift heavier weights and man heavier hoses than you could ordinarily. 2 men can't hardly hold a 2.5-inch hose with the fire pumps going at full blast. But we did it then at Pearl Harbor, and half the time you couldn't see, except you see a little flame now and then. And you kept the hoses going because the flames were burning on the water towards your ship. And if they're burning all around the stern of your ship, first you fan the flames back, and then you keep them from coming towards you. And the wind was blowing towards us all the time. So we were just fighting and fighting. We had, of course, we had whites on, and the whites we had to throw away after Pearl Harbor. We had to throw our uniforms away. They were so black, covered with oil and smoke and so forth that you couldn't even wash them. They were so dirty and so covered with oil, and everything you touch was black with soot and so forth. If you got near the rail or to go back and fight the fires, everything you touched was black and oily and smelled bad. All the bodies were burning, and it's indescribable, really. It's so horrible that you put it out of your mind afterwards. If you don't, why, you'd wind up going over the edge. So actually, your rage saves you in a battle. You get so pent up and your adrenaline kicks in, I guess they call it, that you fight. Well, it's a battle to the death, and they were machine gunning us while we were manning the hoses. We just hoped that they didn't hit us. And they hit the deck behind us. We could see the splinters coming up behind us, but we kept fighting the fire. And we saved the Tennessee by putting the fire out. But I think it's close to 1/3 burned of the ship. My first thought was, well, this looked like the end of the world. It looked like that the Japanese had caught us napping, and it looked really bad because they were shooting at us, and we were sitting still, and it's easy to hit a target that's not moving. So they had a field day there. They just bombed and strafed. They were strafing anybody that go on top side. By that time, they had the machine guns going from the aftermast, and we had a 5-inch gun. They manned them about 5 minutes. Within 8:05, we were firing at planes, and we knocked down several planes and had an assist because several ships fired the same plane and blew them apart. I understand there's 29 planes destroyed that day that we helped knock down. I know that we got 5 planes, and we helped assisted several more planes we knocked down. And the second wave that came over were horizontal bombers. They were about 10,000 feet. And we had 5-inch 25 caliber guns going by that time. We fired so many shells that it burnt the paint off of our 5-inch anti-aircraft guns. Firing at those planes, they dropped their bombs. A lot of them went in the water. And the Japanese turned around and ran. As quick as they dropped their bombs, they ran away. The second wave weren't as accurate as the first wave. They caught us by surprise. By the second wave, we had ammunition lockers. We'd busted the locks because the keys were somewhere. The gunnery officer had the keys, and he was ashore. So they knocked the locks off and opened the ammunition lockers that way, and they were manned and ready. By the time the second wave came, around 10 o'clock, it might have been 5 minutes to 10, but it's around 10 o'clock. It's about 2 hours later, and I understand they had 183 planes or something of that sort around there. So the sky was full of planes. When I went up to man the hoses, they were still strafing and bombing the dry dock. At that time, they blew up the USS Ward. I saw the explosion go up real big. The fire from the Arizona turned into black smoke. I think the oil busted the oil tanks, and the oil tanks was burning. The ammunition had set fire to the oil, and everything was burning, and I couldn't see anything at times. I had to wait for the wind to shift, and I got covered with soot fighting that fire from the fantail. But I wasn't the only hose there. They had about 4 hoses, 4 2.5-inch hoses. We had the fire pumps going at full blast, and they were very hard to hold. 2.5-inch, I was on the nozzle, and it was hard to hold. It was trying to whip you around. All we saw was the Japanese planes. The air was full of them. You figure that over 100 planes attacked at Pearl Harbor. And then they had 189 planes in the first wave. And they sent about a dozen planes to Hickam Field to bomb the rows of bombers that were in rows. So they just went up and down the rows and set those planes on fire and destroyed most of them. And also the B-17s were coming in, and the radarmen mistook the Japanese for that B-17s. They thought it was a flock of B-17s were coming in to land at Hickam Field. So the officer said, well, forget about it. But, of course, it was the Japanese coming in. And that was one of their big mistakes. They had them on radar, and they should have warned everybody. But the officer said that we're expecting the B-17s. And the B-17s arrived, and they were still bombing and strafing the airfield. And they shot some of the B-17s down, and they managed to land all the B-17s, but some of them were destroyed on the ground after they landed. And they didn't have any, they had guns, but they didn't have any ammunition to fire back at the Japanese. So they were handicapped in that way. I had a hatred or a temper. My temper flared when I thought that they'd attacked there. And then looking at all the dead bodies and so forth floating around the ship, they were picking up bodies for about 2 days. I was angry, and I wondered why the officers didn't warn us, why they didn't tell us about they had sunk a submarine that early that morning, and that should have tipped the officers off, and they should have told us to be ready instead of letting us go until 8 o'clock. And some of the band was back aft, ready to raise the flag. They went ahead and raised the flag, and then they ducked for cover because they were being strafed by Japanese planes. So it was a real shock, and it was very miserable at that time. And the crew of the West Virginia came over. Some of them came over on the lines that were tied up to our ship, to the Tennessee. Some of them crawled over on the lines, and we fed them. We fed all that came aboard because they had lost all their belongings, all their clothes. And I gave them, one man, my blanket because he didn't have a mattress or a blanket to sleep in, and they were sleeping on deck and so forth for a couple of days after the attack. Some of the men were affected worse than others. Like one quartermaster went over the edge, and they had to take him down to the brig and lock him up because he had what you call shell shock, because he was on the bridge and saw the bomb hit the center gun on turret 2. That was right above the shipfitter shop. And this bomb blew up, and it killed the captain of the West Virginia, Captain Benyon or something like that. The captain of the West Virginia was killed by the bomb that hit our center gun. We had some 14-inch guns. We had 3 14-inch guns in turret 3. It hit the center gun right at the turret, and it broke into pieces. Shrapnel went down through the wooden deck and down in the shipfitter shop. Was right down on the second deck, and it shrapnel, big pieces about as big as your head, went down through the wooden deck just like paper. Of course, the bomb was 1,900 pounds, armor-piercing bomb. I cleaned up after the bomb because I was in the cleanup squad. I had to pick up the pieces of the bomb and so forth, and also the pieces of men and so forth that, like, some of them were little pieces. And the bomb was 3 inches thick and just had a small powder charge in it, in the middle. but it was armor piercing. And those were actually shells. They were made by Britain and sold as scrap to Japan for scrap iron. They had HM UK and so forth on. They were sold as scrap and we sold the scrap that made those aircraft carriers that Japan used, those 6 aircraft carriers. I found out later they sunk 4 of them at the Battle of Midway. Those same 4 carriers that had bombed Pearl Harbor were sunk in that big Battle of Midway. So we got even with them there. I thought that the Japanese would probably have troop ships to invade after they knocked out the airfields. And we heard over the radio that the Hickam Field was being attacked, and all the airfields on the island of Oahu was being attacked at the same time. And we figured that the Japanese would probably follow up with troop ships. So we were on our guard. The trouble is, we were kind of trigger happy that night. All the anti-aircraft guns were manned, and here 5 planes came in from the carrier, but we didn't get the word, so we started firing at them. And somehow we fired about 5 rounds at them, and we knocked down 1 or 2 of our own planes, but somehow they didn't tell us that it was, we thought it was a night attack. And by that time, all the lights were off. We maintained a darkened ship throughout that night. And they finally got the word that they were our planes coming in to land. And when they landed, the carrier sent more planes in. They were on their way. They knew they had been attacked at Pearl Harbor, and they should have had some kind of a signal so that we wouldn't open fire on them. It was just a mistake. It was like friendly fire, but we knocked down several of our own planes. And we were at general quarters all that night. We were watching for the Japanese to come back. We were ready for them.
With the busy fall season already in swing, you might be looking for wholesome, convenient meals for jam-packed days. Factor, America's #1 ready-to-eat meal kit, can help you fuel up fast with chef-prepared, dietitian-approved, ready-to-eat meals delivered straight to your door. You'll save time, eat well, and stay on track with your healthy lifestyle. Level up with Gourmet Plus options, prepared to perfection by chefs and ready to eat in record time. Treat yourself to upscale meals with premium ingredients like broccolini, leeks, truffle butter, and asparagus. Looking for calorie-conscious options? Try delicious, dietitian-approved, calorie-smart meals with around or less than 550 calories per serving. Need an extra boost to support your wellness goals and feel your best as you tackle a busy autumn? Try Protein Plus meals with 30 grams of protein or more per serving. With Factor, you can rest assured you're making a sustainable choice. We offset 100% of our delivery emissions, source 100% renewable electricity for our production sites and offices, and feature sustainably sourced seafood in our meals. This September, get Factor and enjoy eating well without the hassle. Simply choose your meals and enjoy fresh, flavor-packed meals delivered to your door. Ready in just 2 minutes, no prep, no mess. Head to factormeals.com/warriors50 and use code warriors50 to get 50% off. That's code warriors50 at factormeals.com/warriors50 to get 50% off.
I'm Josh Klein.
And I'm Elise Hugh.
We host a podcast from Accenture called Built for Change.
Every part of every business is being reinvented right now. That means companies are facing brand new pressures to use fast evolving technologies and address shifting consumer expectations.
But with big changes come even bigger opportunities. We've talked with leaders from every corner of the business world to learn how they're harnessing change to totally reinvent their companies.
And how you can do it too.
Subscribe to Built for Change now so you don't miss an episode.
My ship was so severely damaged that they took part of the crew off of the Tennessee at Bremerton, Washington, sent them to the Maryland, which was in San Francisco. And on the Maryland, I was in the Invasion of Tarawa. We had the Marine detachment. On there was around 150 men. And they loaded them all into the boats after we had bombarded Tarawa for about 2 days. We shelled Tarawa, and we thought we had knocked most of the guns out. But we launched the Marines when in the invasion force, and also they had some Army troop ships. Well, and H.M. Smith, the Marine general, was on the Maryland where I was. And they sent the Marines over, sent 150 over, and the boats brought back about 75 wounded and killed, and 75 of them got after the Japanese were killed or surrendered. I understand there was over 3,000 Japanese on that island to defend it, and 60 some odd surrendered. The rest of them fought to the death. They had to burn some of them out of the caves and so forth. But it was our planes went over and spotted for our guns. And when the planes came back, they landed real quick. We took them aboard ship because they were starting to sink. They had, the Japanese had put the holes through the pontoons on our seaplanes, and they were almost sinking by the time we got the hook and pulled them out of the water. We patched them up real quick, and within a couple of hours, they were back spotting again. And they did that 3 times that day. They'd go over and get full of holes. They shoot at the pontoons, were the largest. Luckily, they didn't kill any of the pilots or down any of our planes. We had 2 planes spotting for us on the Maryland. I watched them go in from the deck, and I had the field glasses. We were allowed to go up on the bridge because I'd stood bridge watches too. I looked at them through the glasses, and the landing ships, LSTs and so forth, they were landing quite a ways out, and I wondered why they didn't go into the beach. And then I understood later they ran onto some coral reefs, and they had to wade for about 100 yards, about 300 feet, into the beach, and the Japanese were manning machine guns, and the Marines would kill the gunners, and another Japanese would get there and man the guns. They knocked, one Marine said they knocked 6 men off of one Japanese machine gun, and he brought it back and showed us. The machine gun was about 6 feet long, and it had air cool, and the air fins were grazed by bullets aimed at the fellow behind, and they killed 6 gunners off of that same machine gun before they could capture it. They were that desperate. The Japanese were very desperate to hold Tarawa. The Marines were firing, and we were firing so much that they had a row of palm trees on the beach, and all those palm trees were just stumps by the time they got through firing. And the Marines had landed, and they made a beachhead, and but the worst thing about it, they had a reef that extended out about 100 yards, and they couldn't go up on the sand. Before they ever got to the sandy beach, they had to wade in waist-deep water, and they held their guns up. I watched them. They held their rifles up over their heads as they went in, and to keep them dry. And, of course, the Japanese were shooting at them because you can't very well fire a gun at them until you get up to where you can get your feet on the sand, and lay down and draw a bead on them. But they finally took the island, and I think it was a couple of days it took to wipe all the Japanese out and capture a few of them. I saw several of our tanks, light tanks and so forth. They got up to the beach, and the Japanese let them have it. And the Marines were out sharpshooting, laying on the sand, trying to get those guns that had fired at the tanks. And the trouble is, it was very hard to make it from the coral up to the beach. And that's where a lot of men got killed, right there. And I was looking through the long glass at the beach and saw it, and I couldn't do anything about it. We sent over 3 LSTs full of Marines, and we got about about half the Marines came back. The others were wounded, and they sent them to the hospital ship. We had laying off about 10 miles away was a hospital ship, so they took them over there. All the wounded. There was several hundred, I understand, got wounded at Tarawa, and it was very bloody. But the worst thing was trying to land and establish a beachhead there.
That was SF3 James Wire. Next time on Warriors in Their Own Words, Wire talks about serving on the USS Missouri during the invasion of Iwo Jima and the Battle of Okinawa. Thanks for listening to Warriors in Their Own Words. If you have any feedback, please email the team at kharbaugh@evergreenpodcasts.com. We're always looking to improve the show. And if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to rate and review. Warriors in Their Own Words is a production of Evergreen Podcasts in partnership with the Honor Project. Our producer is Declan Roars. Bridget Coyne is our production director, and Sean Rule-Hoffman is our audio engineer. Special thanks to Evergreen executive producers Joan Andrews, Michael DeAloia, and David Moss. I'm Ken Harbaugh, and this is Warriors in Their Own Words.
This is Peter.
And this is Tom.
We want to tell you guys a little bit about our podcast. Tom and I met in college, became best friends, and then teachers almost 20 years ago. Sometimes school just does not allow us to elaborate on the topics that we find interesting, like the real shark attacks that inspired the movie Jaws, or the real historical context to Indiana Jones artifacts. Where does cereal come from? Or are zombies real? Does Ben Franklin really deserve to be on a $100 bill? On our podcast, just like in our class, there are no stupid questions.
Just two friends having a lighthearted conversation about history, pop culture, and the context of current events.
Listen to History Teachers Talking Podcast from Evergreen Network, anywhere you get your podcasts.